Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, again, you guys are killing it right now, right? We are now somehow further ahead than we were last year. We are now doing all this amidst the pandemic, and we're also just absolutely killing the game right now. I'm so proud of how well y'all did on your Rome test. But speaking of Rome, we are now talking about European history and Western civilizations following the fall of Rome, right? Now, not fall as in the season we're entering into now, but fall of Rome in the sense of, like, what happens when Rome goes kaput, right? When Rome goes completely kaput and completely, like, crashes off, where is Western civilizations going to go after this, all right? And as we talked about today in class, it's kind of a mixed bag of information, right? As we know, we defined the Middle Ages period today in class, right? We talked about what the word Middle Ages means, why we call it the Middle Ages, why it's referred to as the medieval period, and all these other things, right? But what we didn't get into, and then we also got into the Eastern Golden Age, right? We talked about how the Eastern empires of the Africans, the Arabs, and as well as, like, well, I forgot one thing with the Arab community, and the African communities are going to be having a golden age, making tons and tons of money, right? Now, with that, though, we didn't talk about one important thing. And ironically enough, a lot of teachers would probably spend a ton of time on this, but this is something that I gloss over because I like to refer to more of what's going on in this region of Europe more in totality, right? So in 476 AD, we know that the western half of Rome over here falls, right? We know that it crashes down. It doesn't exist anymore, not really anyway. The administration is gone. The barbarians have moved in, and they are beginning to colonize these areas, right? So the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Huns, the Magyars, the Angles, the Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons, like all these people are moving into this area. The Franks are moving into these areas, and they're establishing communities, which are going to eventually lead to what you know as modern-day Europe, right? Well, this half of Rome never fell, right? Like this half of Rome actually stayed along for another 1,000 years. So why are we calling the Middle Ages the Dark Ages and everything else? It's because during the Renaissance period, writers from this half referred to it as the medieval period or the Middle Ages for this half of the world, right? So what we now need to understand is what was life like for the rest of Rome? What was life like over there on the east side, right? Well, first of all, just so you know, we didn't call it Eastern Rome. We now refer to it as the Byzantine Empire, right? Now, ironically enough, jot this down, people in the Byzantine thought they were still living in Rome, right? Like, so during this time period, people in this area still spoke either Greek or Latin, right? The products of Roman intelligence were still around. Huge cities were still being built. And so these people were like, oh, we're Roman. We're Roman. The West is having a bad time, but the East is doing fine. We call it the Byzantine now because, like I said a second ago, Renaissance writers from that time period referred to it as the Byzantine, right? Now, we are going to gloss over Byzantine history and kind of just go straight square into talking about like how they're going to be really, really affected by the Middle Ages, and we are going to refer to them periodically. So you need to know who they are so we can then refer back to them as we go, okay? Now, who they are and where they came from, first of all, is they were established by Constantine, right? The Byzantine Empire was supposed to be a new Rome, right? So much so that Constantine created a second capital there, right? They had regular old Rome over in Italy, and then they had Nova Roma, where located now at the time was this place called Byzantium, which used to be an old Greek city-state, and then also later on when the Romans took it over, but Constantine renamed it as Nova Roma, hence a new Rome, right? And the Byzantine Empire is the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and Constantine is going to establish this capital and rebuild the Roman city of Byzantium, and he renames it later on. Well, he doesn't. People rename it later on after him, calling it Constantinople, right? So Constantinople becomes a very, very famous, very, very important city, right? So we just went Byzantium, Nova Roma, Constantinople, right? The city just went through three names. And in the modern era, what's it called? Istanbul, all right? So jot that down. Today, the city is called Istanbul, and it's the largest city in Turkey, right? It's not their capital, but it is the largest city in Turkey. So Constantine is a very important figure, right? And we know that Constantine made Christianity legal in this region of the world. We know that Constantine had the very first piece of the Bible written, actually agreed upon text of the Bible written following the Council of Nicaea, right? We know that in the Edict of Milan, like I said, he made Christianity legal, right? And this all happened within the Byzantine Empire, right? Even though, again, they thought they were Roman, right? And the Byzantine Empire had a lot of benefits to it. It had a lot of, like, really, really good things that were occurring inside of it. First of all, Constantinople, the city, was protected on not all sides by water, because that would make you an island, but it was a peninsula that actually jutted out into the Strait of St. George right here, right? And it kind of became the doorway from the west to the east, right? And on this side of the Strait of St. George over here is Turkey, right? Which many people argue is neither Asian nor European, or really it kind of just depends on who you ask. They are trying to enter the European Union in the modern era, which is important to understand. But Constantinople at the time, where it was located, had an official religion of Christianity, had protection on multiple sides by water, which also provided a great trade network there, but also had a very, very strong military and built very large walls around themselves to protect themselves, right? They had to deal with a lot of different threats of invasion, right? A lot of different invaders were like flirting with invading Constantinople because it's such a wealthy, strong, and dominant city, and also because of its trade location, right? So they had to deal with the Huns, they had to deal with the Ottoman Turks, they had to deal with the Seljuk Turks, they had to deal with the Vikings at one point showed up in Constantinople. Then at one point later on, they had to deal with their own people, and Christians came in and burned it to the ground. So it's a very interesting city, right? It's going to have a very, very interesting history, okay? But it was the trade hub, right? It was right between China and Europe, right? And traders would have to pass through the Byzantine Empire and would always go through Constantinople to trade their goods and bring those goods to Europe, right? And that trading hub was on a very specific route. It was called the Silk Road, okay? So this trade hub sat directly in the middle of an area called the Silk Road, right? And the Silk Road, jot that down, is a very, very important, we'll go Silk Road map, is a very important trade trade road that actually spanned the entire continent of Europe, and they would have to pass through right here, and any goods that actually made it to Europe coming out of that monsoon marketplace and all this area right down here had to be traded over land and would stop off in Constantinople first, right? So to say, ironically enough, like that, Constantinople was a wealthy city is an understatement, right? Like Constantinople was a fabulously wealthy city. Fabulously wealthy, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they are located right there smack in the middle of the Silk Road, right? And so to just keep going so you understand, they are also going to grow to become a very, let's double check something real quick. Let me make sure I'm on the right presentation, the updated one. Yep, I'm good. So they're going to grow to be a very, very dominant, very, very large empire later on. And some of you are like, well, Mr. Terry, I have a question. Why would the Byzantinians, if they thought they were Romans, just sit there on their butts and not actually move on trying to take over some other people? And you know what, Victoria? That's a great question. All right, so that's a really good question. And under this guy, they attempted to take back huge swaths of that Western Rome that had fallen off, right? And the man's name that leads them to prominence and brings the Byzantine Empire to its absolute cultural peak is a guy by the name of Justinian, right? Justinian brought the Byzantine Empire to its absolute highest, right? And he's going to rule from 526 from 565. And he's going to rule over a multitude of crises that actually hit the Byzantine Empire, and he is able to keep progressing them forward, right? And he is going to rebuild Constantinople using the money coming through the Silk Road, and he rebuilds it in grand style, right? He is responsible for having built one of the largest monuments in the Christian world, and now also in the Islamic world, the Hagia Sophia, which is absolutely beautiful, right? So jot that down, actually. It's called the Hagia Sophia. It's Jaga Sophia, and put it underneath this, right? That is an example of this beautiful, massive church that he has rebuilt in grand style, and it becomes like a very, very large, we'll talk about it, right? So anyway, and he also, though, invents the Justinian Code, right? The Justinian Code is very important because it's the very first civil law that has existed in Western civilizations since Roman law, but this civil law is very important because it's a law that is meant to apply to everyone, regardless of your class. Because Roman law, as we know, being called the 12 Tables, doesn't apply to everyone the same way, right? Following the struggle of the orders when the plebs actually got it posted in the forum, that was a very monumentous moment for them because they could reference property law that applied to them, right? And they could actually use it and actually imbibe with it. But Justinian's code's different because it made laws that said no class is unaffected by these laws, right? Civil laws are meant to govern everyone and apply to everybody, as in, no, just because he's poor doesn't mean you can steal from him, right? Or et cetera, et cetera. So civil laws are going to be the laws that apply to everyone, regardless of class, right? And Justinian is going to be the ruler in charge of both those things. He is also going to jot this down. He's going to stop a civil war in the Byzantine Empire that started over chariot racing teams. It was like Team Red's going to win, Team Blue's going to win, and then literally a civil war breaks out because of chariot racing teams, right? So he stops a civil war in a revolt, and also he survives a plague, all right? So the plague of Justinian broke out underneath him, and we believe it's the earliest known plague version of the Black Death that's going to show up in about 1,000 years in Europe. So he survives it. He got the plague and didn't die, right? Justinian's a very important figure. Along with him being a very important figure, though, you have to understand he was an autocrat, right? And an autocrat means he was a sole ruler with complete authority, right? Now, was he necessarily alone? No, because he did have a very powerful female figure that ruled alongside of him, right? His wife, Theodora. She was considered a ruthless politician and was Justinian's main advisor and co-ruler, right? And we believe that she actually ruled during the time when he was sick with the plague, right? And Theodora is going to be a very intense politician. She is going to advocate for some of these chariot racing members to be put to death to try and stop this civil war. She is a very intense figure. And guess how they met? She was a dancer, is what we'll call her. All right, so anyway, and apparently they met and fell in love, and he married a common woman, which is very in keeping with his concepts of civil law code, right? Theodora, right, is also going to advise Justinian to create a strong military. And for the very first time in the Byzantine, we're going to see a strong military that's going to be equipped with a weapon that no one's ever seen. It's called Greek fire, right? So they had a very large navy and a very huge military underneath Justinian and Theodora, right? And here's just a little collage of some stuff about the Byzantine Empire. Right there is the Byzantine right there, set upon the Strait of St. George with its large defensive walls. This right here shows the invasions that the Byzantine had to deal with, which happened frequently, and that beauty right here, that is the Hagia Sophia. That is one of my top 10 places I got to go before I die. I do believe that my wife and I may be going there actually sooner rather than later. But it's beautiful. It's in Turkey and Istanbul, and that is the church that he had rebuilt, right? Now, I don't believe these were built under Justinian. These are minarets. Those are call to prayer towers, right, that the Nation of Islam uses. Somebody goes up there at 5 different times a day, sings the call to prayer, and they pray. It was originally built as a Christian temple, right? And it dazzles the mind with its architecture because if you go inside of it, they say that the windows that were actually built around the bottom edge let in so much light that if you look up under the dome, it looks like it's floating, as if it's being held by a chain from God, right? So that right there is a product of Justinian's rule, and this right here is Greek fire, all right? So we believe Greek fire is a way that basically the Byzantine Navy would ignite petroleum, or I'm going to say it, and you're all going to freak out. You're going to be like, oil, all right? So we believe that it was an oil-based substance that when lit, it would then burn, and if it got into water, it would increase its burn rate, right? And you also have to understand that boats made out of this stuff, were made out of, at the time, things like tar and pitch, which are very, very flammable. So they basically invented a pressurized flamethrower for their navy, right? That's massively intense. And this guy just looks like Monday is hitting him really, really hard right in the face, right? It's like, oh my God, you were having a rough day and then that happened, right? So Greek fire destroyed you in the face. And then this right here is just to give you an idea of the Byzantines' place in the medieval world, right? During the Middle Ages, the Byzantine was over here in the orange, right? And then up until 565, which is underneath the reign of Justinian, they added Italy back, they added a bunch of North Africa, and they began to reclaim some of the lands that were lost to some of the people during this time period, right? And that's very important, okay? And so because of an event we're about to talk about in like 2 seconds, it's going to make a lot more sense. But also you can see the kingdom of the Visigoths, right? These are those barbarians that led to the sacking of Rome. They're going to reestablish all these new countries, and the reasons why French people speak French, it's because the Frankish language and the Latin language blended together, right? The reason why Angles speak English is because the French language and the Angles language blended together, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? So these people, while they're reestablishing all of Europe, the Byzantines still doing well. Constantinople still kicking butt. It's right over there in the, whatchamacallit, right over there towards the, like Silk Road. But after Justinian, once he's done ruling, the Byzantine Empire does begin to shrink, right? Because the Byzantine Empire is going to be attacked by numerous amounts of people, including Slavs, not slaves, Slavic tribes, Persians, Vikings, Huns, and several different types of Turks. One Ottoman, one Seljuk, right? So the Byzantine Empire, regardless of its wealth, was subject to a lot of attack and a lot of invasion due to the fact that it was such a cultural hub and such a massive trade destination, right? So going forward, though, there's going to be a massive event that does occur, okay? Now, just so you know, the Byzantine Church is going to go through a very, very intense moment, and y'all have started learning about this in Mr. Mathern's class, so it's going to really, really help us connect all these parts together, right? So the Byzantine Church, which happens to be during this time period, again, remember, was Christianity, right? That was the official religion of the Byzantine Empire following Constantine, and it was believed that the king was a patriarch of the church, as in church leader, or the father of the church in the sense, right? So Justinian would have been considered the Great Schism. 1054. There we go. So, anyway, was considered, Justinian would have been considered a patriarchal leader. Now, looking at this guy, though, we've never seen him, right? Like, who is that? All right, he doesn't look much like a Catholic priest you've seen before. He doesn't look, who is this dude? That guy right there is supposed to be the patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church, right? So they don't have a pope, and all of their religious leaders are supposed to be able to grow their facial hair out, and this is the Eastern Orthodox Church leader. So wait a second, hold up, Mr. Terry. You're telling me that during this time period there's going to be more types of Christianity? Yeah, because due to the chaos caused by the growing tension between the Islamic empires coming in and invading, due to the tensions economically coming in, and then also this is going to lead to a huge amount of disputes, right? And the church is going to go through an event known as the Great Schism. So originally when the church started out in the Byzantine Empire as just the Christian church, right? That church is going to go and completely split in half, right? And that event's going to be known as the Great Schism or the East-West Schism, right? And I love that word, schism. So the schism is going to occur, and it's going to lead to two churches. Now, write both of these down, okay? You're now going to have the Roman Catholic Church, which was very important that you understand, because remember, Justinian took these areas back, so when the schism occurred, the Pope and a leader over here was established as the Roman Catholic Church, and then the Eastern Orthodox Church is going to be established on the other side, right? So you now got two types of Christianity, and this occurred in 1054, right? 1054. In 1054, the Great Schism, or the East-West Schism, is going to occur, and it's going to give you the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, right? Now, really quick, though, that you also understand is why this happened, right? Why? You can put a question mark underneath it. And the big reasons why is disputes amongst the church about several different topics, right? Including the Mass, including theories on church teachings and interpretations of the Bible. And the third one's really, really big. And write these two words down. And I'll tell you what, I'll write them down for you as well, just so you can write them up there on your in your notes. I got to move this coffee so I don't knock that over. That's really, really important. And I also need to probably erase some of this AP stuff. Shout out AP kids. So anyway, you're going to have this big dispute that occurs, right? And the dispute is going to be over iconography. Iconography versus idolatry, right? So what's going to end up occurring, a big component of the Great Schism, is what the difference is between these two things, right? Because the Roman Catholic Church at the time is going to have leaders that are establishing it saying, oh, well, we're using icons to understand the saints and to understand Christ and to understand these other very important figures throughout Christian teaching, right? So they called it iconography, right? As in using a statue of a person to try and better understand their life and how they contributed to the teachings of Christ, right? But the Eastern Orthodox Church is going to begin to accuse them of having idols or idolatry, right? And this is going to be a big proponent to the reason why the church is split, right? So because of this accusation of, oh no, those aren't just statues, those are idols, right? You're worshiping false things and then before the Lord, right? Which violates biblical teaching. But again, though, it was just a very, very big misunderstanding. And but it is going to give us today our Roman Catholic, our RCC, and our Eastern Orthodox, right? And the Byzantine, though, unfortunately, is going to begin to fall, right? So after the Great East-West Schism, and due to these things known as the Crusades, which started around 1099 in the 1090s, these massive wars between Christianity and Islamic forces are going to leave the Byzantine very, very small and very, very weak. But then in 1453, Constantinople would be completely toppled and conquered by the Ottoman Turks, and many famous Christian sites and churches actually still remain there, and many people still make pilgrimages to Constantinople / today, modern-day Istanbul, right? So, but yes, and then it becomes a part of the Ottoman Empire in 1453, so about 400 years later. So that year is where this unit ends, all right? So I'm not saying you're going to have a test tomorrow, but I'm saying we stop talking about the Middle Ages at the fall of Constantinople in 1453, all right? So just so you understand, I was doing all this to tell you that some of that Roman intelligence still existed. It just existed over in the East, right? But that's it. We'll talk to you guys later on. Y'all have a good one. I'll see y'all later.